The smoke was already thick enough to choke on when Beatrice Harper first smelled it, curling through the gaps in the cabin walls like searching fingers, and by the time she realized the danger she was in, flames had already devoured the only door. She had been alone in the small homestead for 3 days, her father having ridden to Independence, California, to trade their meager supply of pelts, leaving her with strict instructions to keep the fire low and the rifle loaded. It was April of 1878, and the Sierra Nevada foothills could still turn bitter cold at night, which was why she had stoked the fire higher than usual before falling asleep. She must have knocked a log loose in her sleep, sending embers onto the dry wooden floor her father had never gotten around to properly treating. Now she was paying for both their mistakes. Beatrice pressed her hand against the small window at the back of the cabin, but the frame had warped years ago and would not budge no matter how hard she pushed. The heat was growing more intense by the second, and she could hear the crack and groan of timber beginning to give way. She was 22 years old, and she had survived too much to die like this. Her mother had passed when Beatrice was only 14, leaving her to manage a household and help her father with the trap line. She had learned to shoot, to skin animals, to survive in country that did not forgive weakness. But none of that mattered now as smoke filled her lungs and her eyes streamed with tears. She dropped to the floor where the air was slightly clearer and crawled toward the corner where they kept the water barrel, but it was nearly empty. She splashed what remained on her face and the collar of her dress, knowing it would do little good. The walls were fully engulfed now, the heat so intense she could feel her skin beginning to blister. She thought of her father returning to find nothing but ashes and felt a grief so sharp it cut through even her terror. He had already lost so much. This would break him entirely through the roar of the flames. She almost did not hear the sound of hoofbeats. Then came a voice, deep and urgent, shouting something she could not make out. She tried to call back but could only manage a weak cough. The smoke was winning, pulling her down into darkness. She heard a tremendous crash as something hit the door, then another. Wood splintered. Then strong arms were lifting her, and she was being carried through a wall of fire that seemed determined to consume them both. The cool evening air hit her face like a blessing. She gasped and coughed, her lungs burning as she tried to draw breath. She was aware of being laid gently on the ground, of hands checking her pulse, of that same deep voice speaking to her in steady, calming tones. When she finally managed to open her eyes, she found herself looking up at a man she had never seen before. He had dark hair that fell almost to his shoulders, eyes the color of storm clouds, and a face that was all hard angles and weather-worn lines. Soot streaked his skin, and she could see where his shirt had been singed by the flames. "You are alive," he said, and there was such relief in his voice that it startled her. "Can you breathe? Are you hurt?" She tried to answer but dissolved into another coughing fit. He helped her sit up, supporting her back with one arm while she struggled to clear her lungs. When she could finally speak, her voice came out as a rasp. "Who are you?" "Name is Thomas Carver," he said. "I was riding past when I saw the smoke. Is anyone else inside?" She shook her head, then looked past him at what remained of the cabin. The entire structure was engulfed now, flames reaching toward the darkening sky. Everything she and her father owned was in there. Their clothes, their supplies, the few precious items that had belonged to her mother. All of it was turning to ash before her eyes. "My father," she managed. "He is in Independence. He will come back and find nothing." "He will find you alive," Thomas said firmly. "That is what matters. Can you stand?" She was not certain, but she let him help her to her feet. Her legs shook, and she would have fallen if he had not kept his arm around her waist. She became aware then of how she must look. her dress scorched and filthy, her hair coming loose from its braid, her face surely covered in soot. But Thomas Carver was not looking at her with pity or disgust. He was looking at her with something else entirely, something that made her heart beat faster despite everything that had just happened. "I have a camp about a mile from here," he said. "You need water and rest. In the morning, I will take you into Independence to find your father." She wanted to protest, to insist she could manage on her own, but the truth was she had nowhere to go and no way to get there. The cabin was gone. Their horse was pastured near town with her father. She had nothing but the scorched dress on her back and the stranger beside her. So she nodded and let him help her toward his horse. The animal was a fine bay gelding with intelligent eyes and a calm temperament. Thomas lifted her into the saddle with surprising gentleness for a man with such rough hands, then swung up behind her. She was acutely aware of his chest against her back, his arms on either side of her as he took up the reins. She had never been this close to a man other than her father, and the sensation was both unsettling and oddly comforting. They rode in silence through the gathering darkness, the sound of the burning cabin fading behind them. Beatrice found herself fighting to stay conscious, the shock and exhaustion pulling at her. She felt Thomas shift slightly, adjusting his hold so she would not slide from the saddle. "Stay with me," he said quietly. "We are almost there." His camp was simple but well organized. A small fire burned in a ring of stones with a bedroll laid out nearby and saddlebags propped against a fallen log. He dismounted first, then helped her down, his hands steady on her waist. She swayed on her feet, and he guided her to sit on the log. "I have water," he said, pulling a canteen from his saddlebag. "Drink slowly." The water was cool and sweet, and Beatrice had to force herself not to gulp it down. Her throat was raw and every swallow hurt, but she had never tasted anything better. Thomas watched her for a moment, then moved to tend his horse, giving her space to collect herself. She studied him in the firelight, trying to understand who this man was and why he had risked his life for hers. He moved with the easy confidence of someone who spent most of his time outdoors, his actions efficient and purposeful. He could not have been much older than her, perhaps 25 or 26, but he had the bearing of someone who had seen and done hard things. There was a rifle in his saddle scabbard and a revolver on his hip, but he wore them like tools rather than threats. When he returned to the fire, he had a bundle in his hands. "I have a spare shirt," he said. "It will be too big, but it is clean. Your dress is ruined." She looked down at herself and saw he was right. The hem was charred, and the fabric was torn in several places. She accepted the shirt with murmured thanks, then waited for him to turn his back before quickly changing. The shirt fell almost to her knees, and she had to roll the sleeves several times, but it was soft and smelled of wood smoke and sage. She felt almost human again. "Thank you," she said when he turned back around. "You saved my life. I do not even know how to begin to repay you." "You do not owe me anything," Thomas said, settling onto the ground across the fire from her. "I did what anyone would do." "Not anyone," Beatrice said. "Most people would have kept riding. That cabin was fully ablaze. You could have died." He met her eyes across the flames, and she saw something flicker in his expression. "I could not leave you," he said simply. "I heard you inside, and I could not leave." They fell silent then, the weight of what had happened settling over them both. Beatrice felt tears starting to burn behind her eyes, and she blinked them back fiercely. She had not cried when her mother died, and she would not cry now. But the loss was hitting her all at once, the realization that she truly had nothing left except the borrowed shirt on her back. "Tell me about your father," Thomas said after a moment, his voice gentle. "What is his name?" "William Harper," she said. "He is a trapper. We have been working this territory for 8 years now. He went to Independence 3 days ago to trade our pelts. He should be back tomorrow or the next day." Her voice cracked slightly. "He will blame himself for this, for leaving me alone." "It was an accident," Thomas said. "These things happen. The important thing is you are safe." "Safe but homeless," Beatrice said bitterly. "We have nothing now. Everything we owned was in that cabin." "You have your life," Thomas said. "Everything else can be replaced." She wanted to believe him, but the weight of their situation was crushing. Her father was not a young man anymore, and the work was getting harder every year. They had been barely scraping by as it was. Without their home, without their supplies, she did not know how they would survive. The fear must have shown on her face because Thomas leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Listen to me," he said. "I know things seem impossible right now, but you will find a way through this. You are strong. I could see that the moment I pulled you from those flames. You did not panic. You stayed low where the air was clearer. You were fighting to survive. That counts for something." "How do you know I stayed low?" she asked. "Because you are still alive," he said. "Anyone who stood up in that smoke would have been unconscious in seconds. You knew what to do. You just ran out of time." She absorbed this, feeling a small flicker of something that might have been pride. She had fought, she had survived, that had to count for something. She looked at Thomas again, really looked at him, and found herself wondering about his story. What was he doing out here alone? Where had he come from and where was he going? "What about you?" she asked. "What brings you to these foothills?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "I am heading north," he said finally. "I have been drifting for a while now, taking work where I can find it, moving on when it is time to move on." Drifting from what? The question was too bold, too personal, but Beatrice found she genuinely wanted to know. Thomas met her eyes and she saw a deep weariness in them. "From the past, I suppose. I was a ranch hand in Nevada for several years. Good work, good people. But the owner died and his son sold the place off piece by piece. A lot of us were let go. I decided it was time to see what else was out there." "Have you found it?" "Not yet," he admitted, "but I keep looking." There was a loneliness in his words that Beatrice recognized because she felt it too. She and her father had each other, but they lived an isolated existence in these mountains. Sometimes weeks would go by without seeing another soul. She had grown used to the solitude, but that did not mean she enjoyed it. Looking at Thomas across the fire, she realized he might understand that feeling better than most. "You should rest," he said, rising to his feet. "You have been through hell tonight. Take the bedroll, I will keep watch." "I cannot take your bed," she protested. "You can and you will," he said firmly. "I have slept on hard ground more times than I can count. One more night will not kill me. Besides, you need it more than I do." She was too exhausted to argue further. She moved to the bedroll and lay down, pulling the blanket up to her chin. The ground was hard beneath her, but after what she had just endured, it felt like the finest feather bed. She watched Thomas settle back against the log, his rifle across his knees, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond the firelight. She wanted to stay awake, to talk more, to understand this mysterious cowboy who had appeared out of nowhere to save her life. But sleep was already pulling her under and she surrendered to it. She woke several times during the night, startled by dreams of fire and smoke. Each time, she found Thomas still awake, still watching. Once, their eyes met across the dying embers of the fire, and he gave her a small nod of reassurance. She fell back asleep feeling safer than she had any right to feel, given the circumstances. When dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Beatrice woke to find Thomas already up and moving around the camp. He had coffee brewing over a rebuilt fire, and the smell made her stomach growl with hunger. She sat up, pushing her tangled hair back from her face, acutely aware of how she must look. "Morning," Thomas said, glancing over at her. "How are you feeling?" "Sore," she admitted. "My throat hurts and I think I burned my hands." She looked down at her palms, seeing angry red marks across the skin. He came over immediately, kneeling beside her to examine her hands. His touch was gentle as he turned her palms up toward the light. "These need to be treated," he said. "I have some salve in my pack that should help. When we get to Independence, we should have a doctor look at you." "I am fine," she protested, but he was already moving to get the salve. "You are not fine," he said as he returned. "You were trapped in a burning building. You inhaled smoke. You have burns on your hands and probably elsewhere. That is not fine." He opened the tin of salve and began applying it carefully to her palms. "Does this hurt?" "A little," she admitted. The salve was cool and soothing, and she found herself watching his face as he worked. He had strong features, she decided. A straight nose, a firm jaw, and those remarkable gray eyes that seemed to see more than they should. There was a small scar above his left eyebrow that she had not noticed the night before, and she wondered how he had gotten it. "There," he said, finishing with her hands. "That should help. Try not to use them too much today." "That might be difficult," she said with a weak smile. "I am not very good at sitting still." "Then you and I have that in common," he said, returning her smile. It transformed his face, softening the hard lines and making him look younger. Beatrice felt her heart do an odd little flutter in her chest, and she looked away quickly. They ate a simple breakfast of hardtack and coffee, then broke camp. Thomas saddled his horse while Beatrice tried to make herself more presentable, finger-combing her hair and braiding it as best she could without a mirror. She was wearing nothing but his shirt, and while it covered her adequately, she felt exposed and vulnerable. As if reading her thoughts, Thomas pulled a spare pair of trousers from his saddlebag. "These might fit if you roll up the legs," he said, handing them to her. "Not proper for a lady, I know, but better than riding into town in just a shirt." She took them gratefully and changed quickly while he saw to the horse. The trousers were indeed too long and too loose at the waist, but she managed to secure them with a piece of rope she found among his supplies. She felt ridiculous, dressed in a man's clothes that did not fit, but at least she was decent. The ride to Independence took less than an hour. Beatrice rode in front of Thomas again, hyper-aware of his presence behind her. They did not talk much, both of them seemingly lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the town, Beatrice felt her anxiety growing. What if her father had already returned home? What if he had found the burned cabin and thought she was dead? The worry gnawed at her until Thomas seemed to sense it. "We will find him," he said quietly. "One way or another, we will find him." Independence was a small but bustling town, one of many that had sprung up in the Sierra Nevada foothills during the gold rush days, and somehow managed to survive after the easy gold ran out. The main street was lined with false-fronted buildings housing a general store, a saloon, a boarding house, and various other establishments. People moved along the boardwalks, going about their business, and Beatrice scanned every face hoping to see her father. Thomas guided his horse toward the general store, which also served as the town's informal information center. He dismounted and helped Beatrice down, his hands lingering on her waist for just a moment longer than necessary. She looked up at him, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of something neither of them was quite ready to name. Inside the store, a thin man with spectacles and thinning hair looked up from behind the counter. His eyes widened when he saw Beatrice in her borrowed clothes, her face still showing the effects of the fire. "Miss Harper," he said, "what on earth happened?" "There was a fire, Mr. Dalton," Beatrice said. Our cabin burned down last night. I am looking for my father. Has he been in town? He was here yesterday, Dalton said. Got a fair price for his pelts, bought some supplies, and said he was heading back this morning. He left about an hour ago. Beatrice felt her stomach drop. Her father was on his way home to find nothing but ruins. She looked at Thomas, her distress evident. We have to go back, she said. We have to reach him before he gets there. We will, Thomas said. He turned to Dalton. Can you spare some supplies? Miss Harper lost everything in the fire. She needs clothes, food, basic necessities. I will pay. You do not have to do that, Beatrice protested, but Thomas waved her off. Consider it a loan if it makes you feel better, he said. You can pay me back when you are on your feet again. Dalton was already moving around the store, gathering items. He pulled a simple cotton dress from a shelf, along with a pair of sturdy boots, stockings, and a warm shawl. He added food supplies, cooking implements, blankets, and other essentials. Beatrice watched the pile grow, feeling overwhelmed by Thomas's generosity. This is too much, she said quietly. It is what you need, he replied. That is all that matters. When Dalton had finished, Thomas paid him from a leather pouch he kept in his coat pocket. Beatrice did not see how much money changed hands, but she suspected it was a significant sum. She made a silent vow to repay every penny, no matter how long it took. She changed into the dress in a small back room, grateful beyond words to be wearing proper clothing again. The dress was plain blue cotton, well made but simple, and the boots fit reasonably well. When she emerged, Thomas was loading the supplies onto his horse, redistributing the weight to accommodate the extra burden. Ready? He asked. She nodded, and they set out again, riding hard back toward what remained of her home. The miles passed in a blur, Beatrice's mind racing with worry about her father. What would he do when he saw the cabin? How would he react? Would he blame himself, as she feared? They smelled the lingering smoke before they saw the ruins. Thomas slowed the horse to a walk as they approached, and Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes at the sight. The cabin was nothing but a blackened skeleton now, still smoldering in places. The clearing around it was scorched, and their small garden had been trampled by fleeing wildlife. It looked even worse in daylight than it had the night before. A horse was tied to a tree at the edge of the clearing, and a man stood among the ruins, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "Papa," Beatrice breathed. William Harper turned at the sound of the approaching horse, and his face went through a series of rapid transformations. Shock, disbelief, and then overwhelming relief. He ran toward them as Thomas brought the horse to a stop, and Beatrice slid down into her father's arms. "Bea," he gasped, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "Oh God, Bea, I thought you were dead. I thought I lost you." "I am all right, Papa," she said, her own tears flowing freely now. "I am all right. This man saved me. He pulled me from the fire." William looked up at Thomas, who had dismounted and stood a respectful distance away. "You saved my daughter." "Yes, sir," Thomas said simply. William released Beatrice and strode toward Thomas, and for a moment Beatrice feared her father might be angry. Instead, he pulled Thomas into a fierce embrace. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you. I owe you everything." Thomas looked uncomfortable with the display of gratitude, but he accepted it with grace. "I am just glad I was in the right place at the right time." "What is your name, son?" "Thomas Carver, sir." "Well, Thomas Carver, I am William Harper, and I am forever in your debt. Tell me what happened. Tell me everything." They spent the next hour going over the events of the previous night. William examined the ruins of the cabin, shaking his head at the devastation. "We can rebuild," he said finally. "It will take time, but we can rebuild. We still have the horse, our traps, and the land. That is enough to start over." "Where will you stay in the meantime?" Thomas asked. William rubbed his face wearily. We have a lean-to shelter about half a mile from here. We used it when we first came to this land before we built the cabin. It is rough, but it is shelter. We will make do until I can get a proper structure up. That will take weeks, maybe months, Thomas said. Winter is still too close for comfort. You need something more substantial. We will manage, William said, but Beatrice could hear the doubt in his voice. Her father was strong, but he was also 53 years old, and the years of hard living had taken their toll. Building a cabin was young man's work, and she knew it would be a struggle for him. Thomas must have been thinking the same thing because he was quiet for a long moment, clearly considering something. Finally, he spoke. I could help you build it. I have experience with carpentry and construction. Between the three of us, we could have a basic cabin up in a couple of weeks. We could not ask you to do that, William said immediately. You have already done more than enough. You are not asking, Thomas said. I am offering. Truth is, I do not have anywhere in particular to be. I can spare a few weeks to help you get back on your feet. Beatrice felt something warm bloom in her chest at his words. She knew he was doing this partly out of kindness, but she suspected there might be another reason as well. She had caught him looking at her several times during the ride, his expression thoughtful and intent. Unless she was very much mistaken, Thomas Carver had reasons of his own for wanting to stay. William looked at his daughter, then back at Thomas. Are you certain? I am certain, Thomas said. Then I accept and gratefully, William said. We will pay you for your time, of course. I do not need payment, Thomas said. Room and board is enough. Nonsense, William said firmly. A man deserves fair wages for his labor. We will work something out. They spent the rest of the day salvaging what they could from the ruins and moving their meager supplies to the lean-to. It was indeed rough, barely more than a slanted roof propped up on poles with 3 walls of stacked logs. But it would keep them dry and out of the wind, which was more than nothing. Thomas insisted they take his bedroll and blankets over both Beatrice and William's protests. As the sun began to set, they built a fire and made camp. William had brought food from Independence, and Beatrice prepared a simple meal of beans and bacon while the men discussed plans for the new cabin. She found herself watching Thomas as he talked, admiring the way he listened carefully to her father's ideas and offered suggestions of his own. He treated William with respect, never talking down to him or dismissing his concerns. It was clear he was a man who understood the value of hard work and honest dealing. After they ate, William pulled out a worn pipe and tobacco pouch, settling back against a log with a contented sigh. Tell me about yourself, Thomas, he said. Where do you come from? Thomas was quiet for a moment, and Beatrice sensed he was deciding how much to share. I grew up in Colorado, he said finally. My father was a rancher, small operation but successful enough. I was the youngest of 4 boys, so I knew from the start I would not be inheriting the land. When I was 18, I struck out on my own, worked on various ranches, learned different trades, tried to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And what do you want to do? William asked. I still do not know for certain, Thomas admitted. But I know I want to build something, have something of my own, a place where I can put down roots and maybe start a family someday. Beatrice felt her cheeks flush at these words, though Thomas was not looking at her. She busied herself cleaning up from dinner, very aware that her father was watching her with knowing eyes. Those are good ambitions, William said. A man needs purpose, needs to feel like he is building toward something. They talked long into the evening, and Beatrice learned more about Thomas Carver. He had worked on cattle drives, helped build railroad trestles, even spent a winter trapping beaver in the high mountains. He had seen much of the West and met people from all walks of life. He was well-spoken and thoughtful, with a dry sense of humor that surfaced occasionally. The more Beatrice learned about him, the more intrigued she became. Finally, as the fire burned low, William declared it was time for sleep. They arranged themselves in the cramped lean-to, Beatrice on one side with the blankets, William in the middle, and Thomas on the other side with his saddle for a pillow. It was not comfortable, but it was warm, and after the trauma of the previous night, Beatrice was simply grateful to be alive and safe. She lay awake for a while, listening to her father's snoring and the sounds of the night. She could hear Thomas breathing steadily on the other side of her father, and she wondered if he was also awake. The events of the past day and night seemed almost unreal. Yesterday morning she had been alone in the cabin, going about her usual routine. Now the cabin was gone, and a stranger who had saved her life was sleeping a few feet away, planning to spend the next weeks helping them rebuild. Life, Beatrice reflected, could change in the span of a single heartbeat. The next morning they started work on the new cabin. Thomas had a clear vision for how it should be built, and he walked William and Beatrice through each step. They would need to cut and haul logs, prepare the foundation, notch and stack the walls, and construct the roof. It was back-breaking work, but Thomas approached it with a steady determination that was contagious. Beatrice insisted on helping despite her father's protests. "I am not some delicate flower," she said firmly. "I have worked alongside you for years, Papa. I can help with this too." Thomas settled the matter. "We need all the hands we can get," he said. "If Miss Harper wants to help, I am not going to refuse." So she worked with them, doing what she could with her still healing hands. She helped drag smaller logs, gathered stones for the foundation, and prepared meals when they broke for food. It was hard work, and by the end of each day she was exhausted and sore. But there was something satisfying about it too, something deeply rewarding about building something from nothing. As the days passed, Beatrice found herself growing more comfortable around Thomas. They developed an easy rhythm, working side by side without need for constant conversation. But when they did talk, she found he listened to her in a way few men did, actually considering her opinions rather than dismissing them. He asked her questions about her life, about growing up in these mountains, about her dreams and hopes. She, in turn, learned more about him, piecing together the story of a man who was searching for something he could not quite name. One afternoon, about a week into the construction, Beatrice and Thomas were working together to strip bark from a log. Her father had gone to check the trap line, leaving them alone. The silence between them was comfortable, broken only by the sounds of their work and the wind in the pines. "Can I ask you something?" Beatrice said finally. "Of course," Thomas replied. "Why did you really stop when you saw the fire?" "You could have kept riding. No one would have known." Thomas paused in his work, his expression thoughtful. "I suppose I stopped because I have been the person who needed help before. When I was 19, I was working on a ranch in Utah. We had a bad winter and I got caught out in a blizzard. I was lost and freezing, sure I was going to die. Then a Ute man found me and brought me back to his family's camp. They kept me alive through that storm and for 2 weeks after while I recovered from frostbite. They did not know me. They had no reason to help me, but they did anyway." "Because it was the right thing to do," Beatrice said softly. "Because we look out for each other," Thomas corrected. "Out here we have to. The land is too harsh, too unforgiving. If we do not help each other, we will not survive." "Still," Beatrice said, "you ran into a burning building. That goes beyond just helping. That was risking your life." He met her eyes and she saw something intense in his gaze. "Some risks are worth taking," he said quietly. The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Beatrice felt her heart racing, felt a pull toward this man that was both thrilling and terrifying. She had never felt this way before, had never experienced this magnetic attraction that seemed to exist between them. She did not know what to do with these feelings, how to name them or act on them. The sound of her father's returning footsteps broke the spell, and they both returned to their work, but Beatrice could not shake the memory of that look, the weight of those words. Some risks are worth taking. What had he meant by that? Was he talking about saving her from the fire, or was he talking about something else entirely? That night, after dinner, William pulled out a harmonica Beatrice had not known he still possessed. "Found this in my saddlebag," he said with a grin. "Forgot I had brought it to trade, then decided to keep it. Been a while since I played." He put the instrument to his lips and began to play, a lilting melody that spoke of longing and distant places. Beatrice closed her eyes and listened, feeling the music wash over her. When her father finished, Thomas spoke up. "My mother used to sing a song to that tune," he said. "Something about a willow tree and a lost love." "Sing it," William encouraged. "I am not much of a singer," Thomas protested. "Neither am I, but that does not stop me," William said with a laugh. "Come on, son. Let us hear it." Reluctantly, Thomas began to sing. His voice was rough and untrained, but it carried the melody well, and the words spoke of a love that endured despite separation and hardship. Beatrice found herself watching him as he sang, seeing a different side of this quiet, capable man. When he finished, there was a moment of silence. "That was beautiful," Beatrice said softly. Thomas looked embarrassed but pleased. "My mother would be surprised to hear you say so. She always said I could not carry a tune in a bucket." They all laughed, and the moment of awkwardness passed. But Beatrice felt something shift inside her, a deepening of the feelings she had been trying to ignore. She was falling in love with Thomas Carver, and she did not know what to do about it. The days continued to pass, marked by steady progress on the cabin. The walls rose log by log, and the structure began to take shape. Thomas worked tirelessly, often continuing after William had called it a day, determined to get the cabin finished before the next storm rolled through. Beatrice helped where she could, but she also found herself taking on more domestic tasks, cooking and mending and managing their supplies. One evening, as she was preparing dinner, Thomas appeared beside her with an armful of wildflowers. "I found these growing near the stream," he said, looking almost shy. "Thought they might brighten up the camp." Beatrice took them, her heart swelling with unexpected emotion. They were simple flowers, nothing fancy, but the gesture touched her deeply. "Thank you," she said, meeting his eyes. "They are lovely." "Not as lovely as you," he said, so quietly she almost did not hear him. She stared at him, her breath catching. "Thomas, I—" But he was already walking away, leaving her holding the flowers and wondering if she had imagined those words. She arranged the wildflowers in a tin cup and set them near her bedding, touching the petals gently. She had not imagined it. He had said those words, and they meant something. He felt it too, this pull between them. The knowledge was both exhilarating and frightening. That night, she lay awake for hours, hyper-aware of Thomas sleeping nearby. She knew her father had noticed the growing connection between them. William was many things, but he was not blind. She wondered what he thought about it, whether he approved or had concerns. Thomas had proven himself to be a good man, honorable and hardworking. But he was also a drifter, someone who by his own admission was still searching for his place in the world. Would he move on when the cabin was finished? Would he disappear from her life as suddenly as he had appeared? The thought of him leaving created an ache in her chest that surprised her with its intensity. She had known him for less than 2 weeks, and yet she could not imagine going back to her old life, to the long, lonely days with only her father for company. Thomas had awakened something in her, a yearning for more than mere survival. He made her want to live fully, to take risks, to reach for happiness. 2 weeks after they began construction, the cabin was nearly complete. It was smaller than their old home, but sturdier, built with care and skill. Thomas had shown them techniques he learned over his years of wandering, ways to make the structure more weatherproof and durable. They had just finished installing the door when a spring storm rolled in, dark clouds gathering over the mountains with ominous speed. "We should test out the new roof," William said, grinning. "See if Thomas's work is as good as he claims." They gathered inside the cabin as the first drops of rain began to fall. It was strange being in this new space, with its smell of fresh-cut wood and its empty corners waiting to be filled with life. Thomas walked the perimeter, checking for leaks, while Beatrice and William watched the rain drum against the windows. "This is good work, son," William said, clapping Thomas on the shoulder. "Better than I could have done on my own and in half the time. We are lucky you came along when you did." "I am the lucky one," Thomas said, his eyes finding Beatrice's across the room. "I found more than I expected out here." William looked between them, a knowing smile playing at his lips. "Well now," he said, "I think I am going to check on the horse, make sure he is properly sheltered from this storm." He grabbed his coat and headed for the door, giving them a meaningful look as he left. Suddenly, Beatrice and Thomas were alone in the new cabin, the sound of rain providing a cocoon of privacy. Thomas moved closer to her, and she could see the uncertainty in his eyes, the question he was afraid to ask. "Beatrice," he began, then stopped. "I do not know how to say this properly." "Then say it improperly," she said softly, her heart pounding. He took a deep breath. "When I pulled you from that fire, something changed in me. I have been drifting for years, never staying anywhere too long, never letting myself get attached to people or places. But from the moment I saw you, I knew I could not just walk away. These past 2 weeks, working alongside you and your father building this cabin, it has felt like home. You have felt like home." Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes. "I have felt it too," she whispered. "From that first night when I woke up and saw you watching over me, I have never felt this way before, Thomas. It scares me." "It scares me too," he admitted. He reached out and took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "But I do not want to run from it anymore. I want to stay. If you will have me, if your father will have me, I want to make a life here with you." "What about your dreams of having your own place?" she asked. "Your own land?" "Maybe this can be my place," he said. "Your father needs help with the trapline, with managing the land. I could be useful here. And if we worked together, maybe we could expand, make something bigger and better. I do not need to own the land to feel like I belong. I just need to be somewhere I am wanted." "You are wanted," Beatrice said fiercely. "You are wanted very much." Thomas cupped her face in his hands, his touch infinitely gentle. "May I kiss you?" she answered by rising on her toes and pressing her lips to his. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, both of them learning the taste and feel of each other. Then Thomas wrapped his arms around her waist and deepened the kiss, and Beatrice felt like she was burning again, but this time with a fire that brought life instead of destruction. She clung to him, pouring all her fear and hope and love into that embrace. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said. "I know it is fast, I know we barely know each other, but I love you, Beatrice Harper." "I love you too," she said, joy bubbling up inside her. "I love you, Thomas Carver." The door opened, and William stepped back inside, studiously not looking at them as he shook water from his coat. "Storm is getting worse," he announced. "Looks like we are stuck inside for a while." He finally looked up and saw their joined hands, their flushed faces. "Anything happen while I was gone that I should know about?" "Thomas wants to stay," Beatrice blurted out. "He wants to make a life here, with us, with me." William looked at Thomas for a long moment, his expression serious. "That is a big decision, son. You are sure about this?" "I am more sure of this than I have been of anything in my life," Thomas said steadily. "I know I cannot offer Beatrice much right now. I have some savings, but not enough to buy land or start a ranch. What I have is two strong hands, a willingness to work, and a heart that belongs to your daughter. If that is enough, if you will let me court her properly, I promise I will spend the rest of my life making her happy." William was quiet, considering. Then he smiled. "You saved her life, Thomas. You have worked alongside us for weeks without complaint. You have shown yourself to be honest, capable, and kind. As far as I am concerned, you are family already. If Beatrice wants you and you want her, then you have my blessing." Beatrice felt relief flood through her. She had not realized how worried she was about her father's reaction until he gave his approval. She looked at Thomas and saw the same relief mirrored in his face. He had been nervous too, she realized, afraid that William might send him away. "Thank you, sir," Thomas said. "You will not regret this." "See that I do not," William said, but his tone was warm. "Now, how about we celebrate? I have a bottle of whiskey I have been saving for a special occasion. I would say this qualifies." They spent the rest of the stormy afternoon in the new cabin, talking and planning and dreaming of the future. Thomas outlined his ideas for expanding their trapping operation, possibly diversifying into hunting and trading with the miners who still worked claims in the surrounding hills. William listened carefully, asking questions and offering his own expertise. Beatrice watched them both, her heart full, marveling at how quickly everything had changed. As the sun set and the storm began to clear, William stood and stretched. "I am going to take first watch tonight," he announced. "Make sure no critters try to take advantage of the new shelter. You two young people should get some rest. Tomorrow we start furnishing this place, making it a real home." After he left, Beatrice and Thomas sat close together on the floor, his arm around her shoulders. "I still cannot quite believe this is happening," she said softly. "A few weeks ago, I thought I was going to die in that fire. Now I have a new cabin and I have you." "Life has a strange way of working out sometimes," Thomas said. "All those years of drifting, and I ended up exactly where I needed to be at exactly the right moment." "Do you believe in fate?" Beatrice asked. "I believe in luck, good and bad," Thomas said. "I believe in being in the right place at the right time. I believe in making the most of the chances we are given. Call it fate if you want, but I think we make our own destiny through the choices we make." "Then I choose you," Beatrice said simply. "Every day for the rest of my life I choose you." He kissed her again, slow and sweet, a promise sealed with touch. When they finally settled down to sleep, Beatrice curled against his side, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. She had never felt so safe, so cherished, so completely happy. The weeks that followed were some of the best of Beatrice's life. Thomas proved to be as good as his word, working tirelessly to help them not just survive but thrive. He taught her father new techniques for setting traps, found new locations that yielded better pelts, and helped establish relationships with traders and independents who gave them fairer prices. The three of them worked as a team, each contributing their skills and strengths. But it was the quiet moments Beatrice treasured most. The evenings when she and Thomas would walk together along the creek, talking about everything and nothing. The mornings when she would wake to find him already up, making coffee and watching the sunrise. The way he looked at her, like she was something precious and worth protecting. The way he held her hand whenever they were near each other, as if he needed that physical connection to prove she was real. 3 months after the fire, Thomas asked William for Beatrice's hand in marriage. It was a formality at that point, everyone knowing what was coming, but Thomas insisted on doing it properly. He spoke to William one evening while Beatrice pretended not to eavesdrop from inside the cabin. "I know I am not a rich man," she heard Thomas say. "I do not have land or a fancy house to offer her. But I love your daughter more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. I will spend every day of my life working to give her the life she deserves. I will protect her, cherish her, and stand by her through whatever comes. If you will give us your blessing, I would be honored to make her my wife." "You already have my blessing, son," William replied. "You have had it since the day you pulled her from that fire. All that matters now is what Beatrice wants." "What I want," Beatrice called out, giving up all pretense of privacy, "is to say yes." She came out of the cabin and found Thomas on one knee, a simple gold band in his hand. "It was my grandmother's," he said. "The only thing of value I own. Beatrice Harper, will you marry me?" "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring on her finger and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. They kissed while William cheered and whistled, and Beatrice felt like her heart might burst from happiness. They were married a month later in Independence, in a simple ceremony attended by the townspeople who had come to know and respect them. Beatrice wore a white dress that Thomas had saved up for, and he wore a new suit that made him look almost uncomfortably formal. But when she walked down the aisle of the small church and saw him waiting for her, saw the love and devotion shining in his eyes, nothing else mattered. The Reverend spoke the familiar words, and they made their vows to each other. To love and to cherish, in sickness and in health, for better or for worse, until death parted them. When Thomas slipped a second ring onto her finger, a wedding band to accompany the engagement ring, Beatrice felt the rightness of it settle deep in her bones. This was her partner, her love, her home. "I pronounce you man and wife," the Reverend said. "You may kiss your bride." Thomas did not need to be told twice. He pulled Beatrice into his arms and kissed her thoroughly, to the applause and laughter of everyone present. When they finally broke apart, both of them were grinning like fools. The celebration that followed was simple but joyful. The townspeople had put together a feast, and there was music and dancing late into the night. Beatrice danced with her new husband, with her father, with half the men in town. But she kept coming back to Thomas, unable to stay away from him for long. As the evening wore on, William pulled Thomas aside for a quiet conversation. Beatrice saw her father press something into Thomas's hand, saw Thomas try to refuse, and William insist. Later, when they were finally alone, she asked Thomas about it. "He gave me a deed," Thomas said, still sounding stunned. "A deed to half the land. He said he is getting older and he wants to know the property will be taken care of when he is gone. He said I have earned it, that I am his son now in every way that matters." Beatrice felt tears well up again. Her father had lost so much in his life, but he still had such a generous heart. "He means it," she said. "You are family, Thomas. You have been from the start." "I know," Thomas said. "That is what makes it so overwhelming. I came out here with nothing, and now I have everything." They made love that night for the first time, tentative and sweet, learning each other's bodies with gentle hands and whispered words. Beatrice had been nervous, not knowing what to expect, but Thomas was patient and caring, making sure she felt safe and loved. Afterward, they lay tangled together, and Beatrice marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. "I never thought I would have this," she confessed. "A husband, a partnership, this kind of love. I thought I would spend my life alone with Papa, taking care of him until he died and then fading away myself." "You will never be alone again," Thomas promised. "I am here and I am not going anywhere. We are going to build a life together, Beatrice. A real life, full of love and laughter and maybe, if we are lucky, children." The mention of children made Beatrice's heart skip. She had not let herself think that far ahead, but now that he had said it, she realized how much she wanted it. A family of her own, children with Thomas's gray eyes and steady spirit. "I would like that," she said softly. "I would like that very much." The first year of their marriage was not without challenges. The winter was harsh, testing their resources and resolve. There were difficult days when game was scarce and money was tight. But they faced it together, Thomas and Beatrice, supported by William. They learned to read each other's moods, to anticipate needs, to work as a seamless unit. Thomas proved to be an exceptional partner in every sense. He never made Beatrice feel less capable because she was a woman, instead valuing her opinions and insights. They made decisions together, from how to manage their trap lines to what supplies to buy. He encouraged her to pursue her own interests, and when she expressed a desire to learn to read and write better, he spent his evenings teaching her by firelight. In the spring, nearly a year after the fire that had brought them together, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but she waited until she was certain before telling Thomas. She chose a quiet evening when William had gone to town, wanting to share the news with her husband privately. "Thomas," she said as they sat together watching the sunset, "I have something to tell you." He turned to her, immediately attentive. "What is it?" "I am with child," she said simply. "We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Thomas just stared at her. Then a smile broke across his face, so bright and joyful it took her breath away. "A baby," he repeated. "We are going to have a baby." He pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as if she might break. "I love you so much," he said into her hair. "Thank you. Thank you for this gift." "Thank you for giving me a life worth living," Beatrice replied, tears of happiness streaming down her face. When William returned and they shared the news, he was equally overjoyed. "A grandchild," he said, his eyes misty. "I never thought I would live to see this day. Your mother would have been so happy, Bea. The pregnancy was not easy." Beatrice suffered from morning sickness that lasted most of the day. And as she grew larger, simple tasks became challenging. But Thomas was endlessly patient and supportive, taking on extra work so she could rest, making sure she ate well, rubbing her aching back and swollen feet without complaint. In December of 1879, on a cold, clear night with stars bright overhead, Beatrice went into labor. They had arranged for a midwife from Independence to be present, and the woman arrived just as the contractions were becoming serious. Thomas stayed by Beatrice's side throughout, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, whispering encouragement when the pain became overwhelming. "You can do this," he kept saying. "You are the strongest person I know. You survived a fire. You can survive this." After hours of hard labor, their son was born, screaming his fury at the world. Thomas cut the cord with shaking hands while Beatrice cradled the baby against her chest, overwhelmed by the rush of love she felt for this tiny, perfect human. He had dark hair like his father and a face that was already showing signs of Thomas's strong features. "What should we name him?" Thomas asked, his voice thick with emotion. "Samuel," Beatrice said. "After your father, Samuel William Carver." Thomas wiped tears from his eyes. "It is perfect." "He is perfect. You are perfect." William came in to meet his grandson, and the look on his face was one of pure joy. "He is beautiful," he said, touching the baby's tiny hand. "He looks like both of you." In the days that followed, they settled into the rhythm of new parenthood. It was exhausting and overwhelming and utterly wonderful. Thomas proved to be a natural father, comfortable with holding and caring for his son. He would walk Samuel around the cabin when he cried, singing the same songs his mother had sung to him. He changed diapers without complaint and took night feedings so Beatrice could rest. As Samuel grew from an infant into a curious, energetic toddler, their family life took on a pleasant routine. Thomas and William continued to work the trap line and expand their trading business, while Beatrice managed the household and cared for Samuel. They prospered, slowly but steadily building security and stability. When Samuel was 2, Beatrice became pregnant again. This time she gave birth to a daughter they named Margaret Rose, after both their mothers. Margaret was smaller and quieter than Samuel had been, with Beatrice's features and Thomas's gray eyes. She seemed to observe everything with a solemn intensity that made them laugh. William doted on his grandchildren, telling them stories and teaching them about the mountains and wildlife. He was getting older, moving slower, but he claimed the children kept him young. "I have more reasons to stick around now," he would say with a grin. The years passed in a blur of work and family, hardship and joy. They added onto the cabin, creating more room as their family grew. Thomas and Beatrice proved to be equal partners in all things, making decisions together and supporting each other through challenges. Their love deepened with time, becoming something steady and unshakable. When Samuel was 5 and Margaret was 3, tragedy struck. William had gone out to check the traps alone, something he still insisted on doing occasionally despite Thomas's protests that he should not go without company. When he did not return by nightfall, Thomas went searching. He found William near the creek, lying peacefully as if asleep. His heart had simply given out, the doctor later confirmed. He had died quickly and without pain, which was some small comfort. They buried William on a hillside overlooking the valley, with a simple wooden cross marking the spot. Beatrice grieved deeply for her father, but she was grateful he had lived to see her happy, to meet his grandchildren, to know that she would be cared for. Thomas grieved, too, for the man who had become like a father to him, who had welcomed him into his family without hesitation. "He gave me everything," Thomas said at the funeral. "A home, a family, a purpose. I will never forget what he did for me." In the months after William's death, Thomas took on the full responsibility of managing their land and business. It was hard work, but he had learned well from William. He hired occasional help when needed, but mostly he managed on his own, determined to honor William's legacy by making the operation successful. Beatrice threw herself into being a mother and managing their home, finding comfort in routine and the demands of daily life. She taught Samuel and Margaret their letters and numbers, preparing them for the day they would attend school and independence. She sewed their clothes, cooked their meals, and made sure they grew up knowing they were loved. 3 years after William's death, when Beatrice was 30 and Thomas was 32, she gave birth to their third child, another son they named William Thomas in honor of both grandfathers. Young William was a happy, easy baby who seemed to bring light back into their lives after the sadness of losing his namesake. By the time Samuel was 10, Margaret was 8, and William was 3. The Carver family had become a respected fixture in Independence and the surrounding territory. Thomas had expanded beyond trapping into general trading and occasionally serving as a guide for people traveling through the mountains. They had built a good life, comfortable if not wealthy, secure if not luxurious. One evening after the children were asleep, Thomas and Beatrice sat outside their cabin watching the stars. It was a warm summer night, peaceful and still. Thomas reached over and took Beatrice's hand, lacing their fingers together. "You remember the night we met?" he asked. "How could I forget?" Beatrice replied. "You saved my life." "No," Thomas said. "You saved mine. I was drifting, lost, going nowhere, then I saw that fire and I found you and suddenly everything made sense. You gave me a purpose, a home, a family. Everything I have, everything I am, it is because of you." "We saved each other," Beatrice said softly. "That is what love does. It saves us from loneliness and gives us a reason to be better than we thought we could be." "I love you," Thomas said. "Just as much now as I did that day in the cabin when I first told you. More, even, because now I know you so completely. I know your strength and your kindness. I know how you hum when you cook, and how you always check the children one more time before bed. I know the sound of your laugh and the way your eyes light up when you smile. I know you, and I love every single part of you." "And I love you," Beatrice said, her heart overflowing. "My rescuer, my partner, my home." They sat together in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching the stars wheel overhead. Beatrice thought back to that terrified girl trapped in the burning cabin, certain she was going to die. She could never have imagined then what her life would become. Thomas had not just saved her from the fire. He had carried her into a new life, a better life, full of love and purpose and joy. Inside the cabin, she could hear one of the children stirring, probably William having one of his frequent nightmares. She started to rise, but Thomas squeezed her hand. "I will go," he said. "You sit and enjoy the peace." She watched him disappear inside, heard his low voice soothing their son. A few minutes later, he emerged and sat back down beside her. "He was dreaming about bears again," Thomas said with a small smile. "I told him his papa would never let a bear get him." "You are a good father," Beatrice said. "I try to be," Thomas replied. "I want to give them everything I did not have: stability, security, a home they never have to leave unless they choose to." "You have given them all that and more," Beatrice assured him. "You have given them love. That is the most important thing." As the years continued to pass, Samuel grew into a young man very much like his father, serious and hardworking with a natural talent for the outdoor life. Margaret proved to be sharp and clever, with a head for numbers that Thomas put to use helping manage their accounts. Young William was still finding his way, full of energy and curiosity. When Samuel turned 16, Thomas took him aside for a serious conversation. "This land will be yours someday," he said. "You and your siblings. Your grandfather built a life here, and your mother and I have tried to expand on it, but what you make of it will be up to you. I want you to know that whatever you choose to do with your life, you have my support." "I want to stay here," Samuel said without hesitation. "I want to keep doing what you and grandfather did. I cannot imagine living anywhere else." Thomas felt pride swell in his chest. His son was choosing this life not because he had no other options, but because he genuinely wanted it. That was all he could ask for. Margaret, on the other hand, had different dreams. At 14, she announced she wanted to become a teacher. "There are children in Independence who need proper schooling," she said. "I could help them. I could make a difference." Thomas and Beatrice supported her ambition, proud of her desire to contribute to the community. They began setting aside money for her to attend the teaching college in Sacramento, knowing she would leave them someday, but wanting her to have every opportunity. Young William was still too young to know what he wanted, but he showed signs of having his mother's artistic talent, always drawing and creating things. Whatever path he chose, Thomas and Beatrice would support him. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Thomas surprised Beatrice with a trip to San Francisco. They left the children in the care of a trusted neighbor and took the stagecoach to the city. It was Beatrice's first time seeing the ocean, and she stood on the beach with tears in her eyes, overwhelmed by its vastness. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "Not as beautiful as you," Thomas said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. They spent 3 wonderful days exploring the city, eating in restaurants, visiting shops, and enjoying the luxury of being alone together. But as much as they enjoyed the adventure, they were both relieved to return home to their mountains and their children. "I love seeing new places," Beatrice said as their cabin came into view, "but I love coming home more." "That is because home is not a place," Thomas said. "It is wherever we are together." As Beatrice entered her 40s and Thomas his mid-40s, they began to slow down, not from necessity but from choice. They had built something lasting, something that would endure beyond their own lives. Their children were growing into capable, compassionate adults. Their business was successful and stable. They had friends and community. They had, against all odds, found happiness. One autumn evening, 20 years after the fire that had brought them together, Beatrice and Thomas made their way back to the site of the old burned cabin. It had been years since they had visited, and nature had reclaimed most of the space. Trees grew where walls had once stood, and wildflowers covered the scorched earth. "It is hard to believe that all of this started here," Beatrice said, looking around, "with fire and fear and certain death." "Life has a way of surprising us," Thomas said. "We plan and prepare, but ultimately we have to be ready for the unexpected, ready to take chances when they present themselves." "Like a cowboy riding past a burning cabin," Beatrice said with a smile. "Like a woman brave enough to survive the flames," Thomas countered. They stood together in the fading light, their hands clasped, surrounded by the evidence of nature's ability to heal and renew. The old had been burned away, but something better had grown in its place, just like their lives. "Thank you," Beatrice said softly. "For what? For running into that fire, for staying, for giving me this life, for loving me." "Thank you for letting me," Thomas replied, "for trusting a stranger, for taking a chance on a drifter with nothing to offer but his heart, for building this life with me." They kissed there among the wildflowers and new growth, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and created something beautiful from the ashes. When they finally pulled apart, they walked back toward their cabin hand in hand, ready to face whatever came next together. The years that followed brought both joys and sorrows, as years always do. Margaret went off to teaching college and eventually returned to Independence to start a school, fulfilling her dream of educating the community's children. She married a kind doctor from Sacramento, and they gave Thomas and Beatrice their first grandchildren. Samuel married a girl from a neighboring ranch, and they settled on a portion of the Carver land, building their own cabin and starting their own family. He proved to be as capable as his father and grandfather, carrying on the family tradition with skill and dedication. Young William surprised everyone by discovering a talent for engineering. He eventually moved to San Francisco to work on building projects, but he came home often, always bringing stories of the wider world. He never married, claiming his work was his passion, but he doted on his nieces and nephews. Thomas and Beatrice watched their children flourish with pride and satisfaction. They had given them strong foundations, and now they were building their own lives. As they entered their 50s, Thomas and Beatrice settled into a comfortable rhythm, still working but at a slower pace, enjoying their grandchildren and the peaceful life they had created. One summer evening, as they sat on the porch of their cabin watching the sun set over the mountains, Beatrice reflected on the long journey that had brought them to this moment. She was 52 now, her hair showing streaks of gray, her hands showing the marks of years of hard work. Thomas was 55, his dark hair mostly silver, lines etched deep around his eyes and mouth. But when he looked at her, she still saw the same love and devotion that had been there from the beginning. "You ever regret it?" she asked suddenly. "Giving up your wandering life? Settling down here instead of seeing the world?" Thomas considered the question seriously, as he always did. "Not for a single moment," he said finally. I saw enough of the world to know that what I found here was rarer and more valuable than anything else I could have discovered. I found love. I found purpose. I found home. What more could any man want? I am glad, Beatrice said, because I cannot imagine my life without you. You are woven into every good thing I have experienced in the past 25 years. Only the good things, Thomas teased. Well, you did eat the last piece of pie last week without asking, Beatrice said with mock severity. That was decidedly not good. Thomas laughed, the sound warming her heart. I will endeavor to do better, though I make no promises where pie is concerned. They sat in companionable silence as darkness fell and stars began to appear. Beatrice felt a deep contentment settle over her. Her life had not been easy, but it had been good, rich with love and meaning. She had survived fire and loss and hardship, and she had emerged stronger for it. And through it all, Thomas had been beside her, her partner and her love. I have been thinking, Thomas said after a while, about what happens when we are gone, the land, the business, our legacy. That is morbid, Beatrice said, though she had been having similar thoughts. Practical, Thomas corrected. We have built something here, B. I want to make sure it is protected, that it goes on long after we are dust. Samuel will take care of the land, Beatrice said. He loves it as much as we do, and the grandchildren will carry on the family name. Our legacy is secure. I know, Thomas said, but I want them to know the story, how it all started. I want them to understand that sometimes the worst moments in our lives lead to the best things. That fire that nearly killed you led to everything we have now. All of this love, all of this life, it came from that moment. Then we will tell them, Beatrice said. We will make sure they know how a cowboy saved a woman from a burning cabin and carried her into a new life. How they fell in love and built a family and a future from nothing but determination and hope. It is a good story, Thomas said. It is our story, Beatrice replied, and I would not change a single word of it. As they sat together under the stars, surrounded by the land they loved and the life they had built, Thomas and Beatrice Carver felt the satisfaction of a life well lived. They had faced challenges and overcome them. They had loved deeply and been loved in return. They had raised children who would make the world better. They had created something lasting. The fire that had nearly ended Beatrice's life had instead transformed it, bringing her a love she had never imagined possible and a happiness that had sustained her through decades. Thomas had run into those flames looking to save a life, and he had found his own salvation in the process. They had rescued each other in the ways that mattered most. Years later, when Thomas and Beatrice were both well into their 70s, they sat together on that same porch, their bodies slower but their love undimmed. Their children were grown with families of their own. Their grandchildren were having children. The cabin had been expanded and improved multiple times, but it still stood on the same foundation Thomas had built all those years ago. One quiet afternoon, Thomas took Beatrice's weathered hand in his own and said, I would do it all again, you know. Every hard day, every struggle, every moment. I would run into those flames 1,000 times if it meant I got to spend my life with you. And I would let you save me 1,000 times, Beatrice replied, tears shining in her eyes. Because you did not just pull me from that cabin, you showed me what it means to truly live. To love without reservation, to build a life worth having. They kissed, gentle and sweet, two people who had weathered decades together and come out stronger for it. When they finally pulled apart, they sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching the sun set over the mountains they had called home for so many years. That night, as they lay in bed together, Beatrice whispered into the darkness, Thank you for everything, my love. Thank you for saying yes, Thomas whispered back, for taking a chance on a drifter with nothing but love to offer. You gave me the world, Beatrice said. You gave me everything. They fell asleep in each other's arms, as they had done for more than 50 years, two souls who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. The fire that had brought them together had burned away the old and made space for the new. From those ashes had grown a love story that would be told and retold by their descendants for generations to come. A love story about a woman trapped in a burning cabin, and a cowboy who ran inside to save her. A cowboy who did not just rescue her from the flames, but carried her into a new life, a better life, a life filled with love and purpose and joy. A life they built together, one day at a time, until they had created something that would endure long after they were gone. And when Thomas and Beatrice Carver finally passed from this world, within days of each other as if neither could bear to be without the other for long, they left behind a legacy of love. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren carried on, working the land and telling the stories. The cabin still stood, expanded and improved but still recognizable as the structure Thomas had built with his own hands all those years ago. The story of the fire and the rescue became family legend, passed down through the generations. Young Carvers grew up hearing about how their great-great-grandmother had nearly died, and how their great-great-grandfather had saved her, and how that single act of courage had led to all of them. They learned that love could be found in the most unexpected places, that sometimes tragedy opens doors to joy, and that the best things in life are worth fighting for. And on clear nights, when the stars shone bright over the Sierra Nevada, the descendants of Thomas and Beatrice Carver would look up at the sky and remember the two people who had started it all. A woman who survived the flames. A man who ran toward danger instead of away from it. Two people who found each other, loved each other, and built something lasting from the ashes of what had been lost. They were the foundation upon which generations were built, and their love story would live on long after the last ember had faded, and the last echo of that long-ago fire had disappeared into legend.